Hello, everyone, and a very big welcome to the 67th Sydney Film Festival, and it's a virtual edition because of COVID-19. I'm Sandy George, and I'm delighted to be hosting this 15-minute Q&A about the feature documentary Descent. And with me is the film's director, writer and editor, Nace Baghai. Congratulations on Descent and on being nominated for a DAF award. Terrific news. Let's start just with how you came across Kiki.
Thank you so much for having me, Sandy. So the answer to your question is that about 3 years ago, I had started expanding my training as an underwater cinematographer to advanced freediving and scuba diving in the cold, dark, murky waters of Sydney. And as I was doing that, a lot of my friends who weren't divers began questioning my sanity and said, "You're crazy. Why would you do such a awfully dangerous thing?" And that question of why do you do it kind of stuck with me for a little while. And as I was starting to do deeper dives, I started meeting a lot of characters from around the world that were also doing the similar kind of things I was doing. And one of these characters happened to be Kiki herself. And my introduction to Kiki came through this video of her free diving in 2 degrees Celsius waters in Iceland, wearing no wetsuit at all and diving on one breath. And as a free diver, I was completely astounded by what she was doing. And when I met her, we pretty much became fast friends because of how, I suppose, easily free divers around the world get on with each other. But when she confided in me around the time Me Too started to happen, that the whole catalyst for her journey was the fact that she had been raped and that ice diving was the only way that she could calm her mind down and access that piece that she was missing. And that's when I really felt the urge to tell her story and make it the first thing that I wanted to do.
And was she happy about that? Like, what was her response to the idea of having an entire film about her?
She was actually quite enthusiastic about it. But the thing is that when we were interviewing her, there were a lot of things that she wasn't really aware about her life story until I actually asked the questions to her directly. And it almost felt like a long therapy session. And what we actually did is that I asked her what the most important events in her life were. And that actually played a huge role in shaping the edit after we finished filming.
Oh, you mean after you'd finished the underwater filming?
Yeah, pretty much.
At what stage did you do that interview?
The interview we did actually at the start of filming. So we filmed in 4 countries: England, Iceland, New Zealand, Australia. So I wanted to get the interview done first because I knew that it was going to be a really personal thing, and I wanted her to feel comfortable for the rest of the filming. And basically that interview we came back to many times in terms of like making sure that the story was not just accurate, but also it was a good story in the sense that it was hitting all the beats and that it was conveying all the important aspects of her life.
But would you say that what we are now seeing on screen is what you envisaged from the outset? And I guess I say that because in a way the film defies expectation. Like, it starts off as an extreme sports doco, I would say, though you do get glimpses of sort of the spiritual nature of it. But then it almost becomes, I guess, like a kind of, I don't know, sort of self-help type film near the end. But then today I heard myself describing it to someone as an essay film. So when you started out, what did you think you would have?
I'm pretty sure this happens to every documentary filmmaker, but the original outline that I had for the entire story was really quite different from what happened, because just before we were ready to start filming, Kiki had planned to do, she mentions it in the film, she was planning to do a world record for diving between 2 ice holes. But then 6 months before we were meant to film, she confided in me that she was actually suffering from a virus that threatened to destroy her freediving career, and she had to completely rework the direction of her life. So we were pretty much the last 10 minutes of the film was pretty much something that constantly evolved throughout principal photography. And it was quite a challenge to come up with a resolution that all of us were happy with. And I would say that although the core philosophy of the idea is there, the actual synopsis and sequence of events is quite different to what I originally envisioned.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have a lot of underwater experience yourself, and your friends think you're mad with some of your activities. And often when I watch extreme sport documentary, I think to myself, yeah, but what about the camera person who's doing more or less what you're doing? How was it for you making the film?
To be honest, I really had a really fun time shooting it, even though we were in quite demanding environments. Because I'm really fond of scuba diving and free diving, it didn't really feel like work for me, even though it was hard work. But I will say though that for the scenes, like some of the scenes, I was behind the camera and I was free diving with Kiki down to 10, 15 odd meters. And I have to say that free diving with a camera is really a lot more difficult compared to diving without one, because I don't have the advantage of switching my mind off and just relaxing, because I have to be hyper alert and aware of what's going on. I have to think, okay, is it in focus? Am I telling a story? Is Kiki doing this? Da, 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 da. And I'm also looking out for her, because Kiki, in addition to being my star, is also my friend. So I'm naturally thinking, I hope she's not pushing herself too long. But I felt really relieved that I didn't have to do that for every single shot, and that I could also play the role of managing it and let someone else have the driver's seat as far as underwater cinematography goes.
Yeah. Presumably you were always scuba diving though, is that?
I actually switched it up, because there were some scenes where it was more practical to do it on scuba diving, and others where free diving was more practical. But I guess that's the advantage of doing both, is that if you have to do one or the other, I have that option.
Yeah. What is the secret of getting great underwater footage?
Whoa, what a great question. I would say the two secrets that I think are underrated in that aspect are, you have to have a good foundation in diving and to be absolutely confident in your skill, your equipment, and how you will react in a challenging situation, because it is quite physically and mentally demanding down there. But I would also say that because underwater cinematographers and photographers are artists as much as directors, editors, and painters are, we also get inspiration from watching things like Blue Planet or National Geographic magazines, or even Rothko paintings. I'd say that drawing inspiration from a particular artist that documents the underwater world is a really good way in telling a story when you're down there, in whether it's warm water or 2-degree water.
Yeah. You've done a lot of corporate work. You've won a lot of awards for your short films, and this is a first feature. Do you expect to keep going in the underwater direction, or have you got other things in mind? How are you thinking about yourself going forward?
I would say a bit of both, actually, because I will always be, as I said earlier, I'd say that the free diving and scuba diving is as much of an equal passion as filmmaking is for me. So I'll always be doing that, whether it's an underwater music video or another underwater documentary with another subject. But there are some other topics outside of the diving world that intrigue me. So the answer is yes, there are quite a few things on my radar, but for now I'm just working on Descent and expanding it into a larger project in the future.
Yeah. What do you mean a larger project? You mean that? Yeah.
So as I said earlier, as I was starting to get more advanced training under my belt, I was meeting a lot of characters that were doing, wreck dives, cave dives, diving with great white sharks outside of a cage or orca dives. And these are the basic concept for the series is about the psychology of people who work in
Oh.
dangerous underwater environments. So it's kind of taking the similar idea of Kiki and then just expanding it and saying it's almost like I would say it's kind of a bit like a Marvel Cinematic Universe, but for divers.
Um, the film begins with a really, really powerful opening, very, very powerful. And I just cannot get out of my mind that shot where she's in the water. I thought she was actually hugging a violin until I worked out it was her flippers. But did you cut that opening sequence early on in the edit or later on in the edit?
That is a really great question because that scene where she's in the Icelandic lagoon, Jökulsárlón, holding her fins, we were originally meant to do a much larger dive sequence there where she would go further out into the deeper part. But I'm not kidding you. The day that we arrived there, it was declared a UNESCO site, which meant that diving and swimming was strictly prohibited. So I know, and I get there and I think, how the hell do we work around this problem? So what we ended up doing is we ended up doing a photo shoot where she was standing with her fins and posing in the water for only a few minutes. And that's actually the image on the cover of the Sydney Film Festival website. And as far as editing the opening goes, that actually was something that went through dozens of revisions over the 5-month editing process. And I have to give a shout out to a guy called Greg Hayes, who reviewed the opening and said, I think you could really revise it this way. And the notes that he gave in terms of making it less esoteric and avant-garde and more simple and explanatory in terms of what ice freediving is and how risky it is, I owe him a lot for pointing me in that direction.
Yeah. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I felt as though the section with her parents was a bit out of character with the film. Was that always intended that you'd talk to her parents?
Yeah, actually, because one of the concepts was that for people like Kiki who go into challenging and underwater environments, they have, spouses, parents, or other relatives that are just fearful for them and are worried about their safety. And I felt like that because Kiki was doing so many diving and it was all about her, I wanted to introduce other characters that lend a more human side to it. And it was really interesting watching Kiki and her mother talk. And even though I didn't understand a word of Dutch that they were saying, I could kind of tell that it was a really interesting dynamic between her mother expressing fear like any parent would and Kiki defending her decision.
Yeah. Perhaps it was just seeing Kiki interviewing someone, really, because that's sort of what it was, wasn't it? She was like asking her mother things and, yeah, I don't know what it was, or maybe it was setting or I don't know. And the other question I want to ask was about the dramatised documentary when you go back 15 years to when she's a child growing up in the Netherlands. Was that always part of it?
Yeah, I feel like that because from the very beginning, the angle I wanted to take with this documentary was a more psychological and character-driven one. As I began doing research on that kind of facet, I realized how early childhood and what we do as kids is actually a really huge indicator of who we are as adults. And when Kiki had told me that she was constantly swimming about and learned to scuba dive when she was only 11 years old, I thought, ooh, that's a really interesting thing that I wanted to cover. But she didn't have any archival footage or photos of that. And I wanted to kind of bring it to life, if you know what I mean. And I wasn't really afraid of treading into the reenactment territory for that.
Yeah. I'm getting the wind up, so I've only got time for one more question. But there's something about Kiki that's very earnest, isn't there? And I found it sort of quite refreshing to see a woman on screen with that earnestness. Did you think about that aspect of her in relation to Descent?
What a great question. It's hard for me to answer that because I'm a guy for obvious reasons, but I I think you're right. I think Kiki is a really earnest and character, and I've noticed how a lot of women, not just freedivers, but other people who don't do what she does, have been able to relate to her and befriend her easily as a result of this project. And I think that um, I also think that her story of just overcoming not only the trauma from being raped, but also the her career being threatened by the virus. I think just her story of just going through all these highs and lows is something that will speak to anyone that hears her story.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last question. What does she think of the film?
Oh, she liked it actually.
Good. Now, thank you so much for talking to us. It was just a great pleasure to see the film, and I'm sure that those that watch it as part of the Sydney Film Festival are going to love it. But thanks so much for making yourself available.
Thank you for having me here.